I've seen enough. North Carolina Central is the best team in HBCU football. Point blank, period. Oh, yeah. It's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com, and if you put down a $5 bet, you get $200 back in bonus bets. So go to FanDuel.com to make every moment more. We'll wrap up today's episode with a look at some interesting comments by a Southern Jaguar player about why the team needed to be humbled. Prior to that, I want to revisit Alabama State, specifically their defense, because I don't think that I did enough praise. I don't think I did enough justice on just how impressive that their performance against FAMU was. So let's go back to that one more time before we move on from the Hornets versus Rattlers. And we kick it off with, I think, a statement and a declaration that maybe is overdue, but to me, this feels right on time. North Carolina Central is the best team in HBCU football, period. There is no, for me, I didn't look at the rankings before I came on here because I didn't want to see any counterpoints. I didn't want to see any points that I could kind of internalize and not really, like, I just didn't want to influence too much. I had thought about this for a while. I talked about it with some people. So I had enough back and forth conversations. I knew where I wanted to take this segment. And that's that North Carolina Central is doing what North Carolina Central has done over the last 2-3 years. If you're talking about their ascension to the top of HBCU football, which has been the case for the last, 3, maybe 4 years, where I think they were second place in the MEAC behind South Carolina State that year that South Carolina State won it all, but then they won the next year. Then you had Howard, and now including this. So let's just say 3 years to really be safe. I understand who they've been and why they're looked at the way that they are. It all boils down to what they've been able to do out of conference. Their ability to dominate in the MEAC, their ability to be this, that, and the third, yes, that plays a big part of it. But when you're talking about how we speak about North Carolina Central, I would say that it may be a very slight edge. But to me, their ability to knock off non-conference opponents is what gets them the majority of the praise. It's what gives us the confidence in them. It's probably part of what gave us the confidence to say that they would be the best team in the MEAC before the season started. I had Coach Oliver on the show. He spoke about the resume. He said, hey, the resume speaks for itself. And that resume isn't just MEAC play. It's what they've done against the CAA. Well, guess what? They had a tough loss against the CAA, against Elon. That was a tough loss. I said that this was a redemption game. I said that this was their chance to go get their lick back. And boy, did they. Because it was a big loss to Elon, but they had a bigger win against Campbell if we're talking about margin of victory, right? It was close. I think it was 41-13, something like that for their loss. And then this one was 44-10 or 45-10. So like it was a slight margin, a difference. But right there, you're looking at just a dominating performance. You're looking at an absolutely dominating performance for North Carolina Central. And the reason I can confidently say that they are the best team, in my opinion, is they're the only team that doesn't have a glaring hole on them. When I'm looking at North Carolina Central, this feels like the appropriate time to say it because they just did what the previous years North Carolina Centrals would do. They beat a CAA opponent. They beat an out-of-conference team. They beat a team in Campbell that does have a top 25 victory on their resume. So this feels like the appropriate time to say that they are the best team in HBCU football. And the reason is, what is their glaring hole? I will give you They struggle against the quarterback run. That popped up in this game as well. But if you're just going offense, defense, special teams, I don't think they have a glaring hole at any of those three aspects of the game. So let's go through it, man. And I like the coaching staff. We know I like Coach Oliver, but you look at the OC, man, that first touchdown was a play in which it was 2nd and goal. Joaquin Davis, he ran across the field, or excuse me, he ran across the backfield because this was before the play snapped. And he was in motion. Then when he crossed Walker Harris's face, when he crossed Walker Harris's face, he then came back. So he moved right to left. He came back across the field, but he went behind Walker. So basically like a bubble screen, and they just threw the little swing pass. And it was a well-executed play because Campbell was in man coverage. The cornerback followed, right? And he was running fast because you want to make sure, because a lot of times those plays will lead to Davis. Let's reset because I want to make sure that it's completely clear on why this was a great setup, and I don't want to rush through this. So let's slow it down. Walker Harris is in the shotgun. Joaquin Davis is split out wide to the right. He comes across the field from right to left, and when he crosses the center, probably gets about the guard. I don't even think he gets to the edge of the tackle. He comes back around. So he goes behind Walker Harris this time. Because Campbell is in man coverage, Campbell's cornerback is running because out of fear that he'll snap the ball as Davis is going in motion, and they'll throw a shallow pass to the left side of the field, right? That's the fear. So you want to make sure that you're playing it fast. But unfortunately, he was in man coverage, and that's not what was happening. So when Davis loops back around Harris, throw the easy swing pass, no one's there to catch him because there's no other receivers that were lined up outside of Davis. That was a really good schematic play. It's one that you see in the NFL. It's not abnormal, but you don't see it in HBCU football that much. I don't see them, at least. But then you look at the quarterback, right? Walker Harris is a solid quarterback, and I know what the scouting report says on him. I know what the scouting report says on Walker Harris. Get him off of his first read and make him beat you some other way. I will say that he's played better in general, and I will say that that's easier said than done. I understand the knock is, oh, well, Walker Harris, you get him to a second read, he'll get flustered. But I also think that Walker Harris does a really good job pre-snap deciphering defenses to where he can get to his first read, right? We've seen a play that was called back. It was a touchdown that was called back down. It was a seam down the middle of the field. He threw that with great anticipation, with absolute quickness, and it was decisive because he knew pre-snap this was the look I'm going to get. It's there. So if you can knock them off, maybe I'll give you that. I'm not here to tell you that they're perfect. They have their flaws, but Walker Harris is a solid quarterback. Jamari Taylor is a more than solid running back. Taylor, to me, is going to be the engine of the offense. And yeah, if you stop him, then it'll be difficult. But I'll say that for any team. Any team, you stop what they do best, they're going to have to find a way to adjust. That's not news. That's not really saying much, to be honest. And I say that because I'm not sure that Walker Harris, at the way that he's playing now, the way that they're rolling now, I'm not sure that he can't come in and be the leader of that offense for a game and get you to a victory. Then you look at defensively, I like him in the front seven. I like him in the back end. You're talking about Sincere Brown, a player for Campbell who was one of the best and most Sincere Brown, one of the most productive wide receivers in the FCS, right? They held Sincere Brown to 4 catches for 33 yards. That's it. He's 9th in the country after that game for yards per game. That tells you how incredible he was prior to that. He was probably 6 to 5, right? He probably was in that range, but they brought him down significantly, man. This is a player who has averaged over 20 yards per catch in 3 games this season. Prior to this, his lowest number was 61. They took Sincere Brown out of the conversation. Campbell wants to throw the ball. I told you before this game, I said, because we talked about Campbell's Delaware State game, I said there's 2 aberrations that happen in that, and I told you one thing they want to do. The 2 aberrations is that Campbell doesn't really score 40 points. That was the only time they did that all year, and they don't give up 40 points. That was only the second time and the first time to an FCS opponent that happened all year. Well, one of the aberrations happened. Campbell gave up 40 points again. This time, they didn't score 40 points, so they lost by a huge margin. You're looking at the one thing I told you they want to do is they want to run, or excuse me, they want to throw the ball. They couldn't get anything going. Campbell wants to throw the ball, and they only threw for 103 yards. I've seen Campbell has thrown for 103 yards and a half before. They did it in an entire game against North Carolina Central. And if you want to go to special teams, because they got that too, Juan Velarde is a legitimate threat on special teams to flip the field at any moment. He's a legitimate threat to pin you inside your 5. He's a he's a kicker as well as a punter, but he hasn't been really asked to kick that much. So I don't feel the need to really get into that. But yeah, you're talking about a 3-dimensional team. They had really good returns against Alabama State, and then Darrell Taylor came in with a punt return in this game. Every single aspect of the game, I would say that North Carolina Central is solid. Offense, solid. Defense, solid. Special teams, solid. All 3 aspects of the game, North Carolina Central is a solid team. I do not believe they have a glaring hole. You have a stylistic matchup that could be difficult if you're talking about running quarterbacks. That's something they're going to have to get together. But if that's the biggest thing that I'm going to say about you, the biggest detriment, the biggest detraction that I'm going to give you is that, hey, I think you may struggle against athletic quarterbacks. You need to get that together before we get into conference play. I'm feeling pretty good about the Eagles. To me, they are the best team in HBCU football. Now, as you push forward, I want to talk about one of the best defenses. I'm talking about Alabama State. These guys are absolute dogs. I don't think that I did enough talking about them. So I want to do that a little bit more as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Roy, and it is time for our Roy Player of the Week. The Roy app lets you directly support your favorite athletes, and unlike collectives, where you make a donation to a general fund, Roy lets you choose a specific athlete that you want to support. You back the players you care about, and in return, you'll get exclusive content after the season, like personal videos, updates, and the best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't create the content, you get your money back. This week, I'm going to choose Ace Cobb because I think that Ace Cobb he wasn't the most explosive, but he had some really good plays, and it was his best game of the season. So we're going to go with Ace Cobb, who had 2 touchdowns against Alabama State. I just contributed $100 to his campaign on Roy. Now, you do the same and download the Roy app in the App Store or Google Play and use the code Locked On when signing up, and you're entered. That's it. That's all you have to do. Already on Roy, make a payment to any athlete's campaign, and you'll be automatically entered to a raffle for $5,000. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day. Every day for your second listen, make sure you're checking out our Locked On conference shows, Locked On SEC, Big 12, Big 10, ACC. Those are my sister and brother shows because technically I am in the conference family. I'm in college too. I'm in the college family, but I'm also more so conference shows, right? Excuse me. So when you're looking, also I forgot to say that North Carolina Central is also ranked now in the AFCA and also in the Stats Perform poll. 25 in Stats Perform and 24 in AFCA, which is just basically the coaches poll. But I want to look at Alabama State because I did look at the defense, but I don't think that I honed in on them enough. At least not on the right talking points and not enough of them, because I did feel like Florida A&M, they had a good performance for facing Alabama State. And that's one of the things to talk about, because the biggest talking point for Alabama State is the fact that their quarterback situation is all the way in the gutter. So when I'm looking at FAMU, I'm like, oh, they made a couple of plays here and there. I don't think that they won the battle against Alabama State, but they did enough. And when you have a good offense like them going against a defense like this, now you're saying who's going to win the battle. And when you look at the loser of the battle, are they going to look pitiful? Because then if they look pitiful, then I'm going to question, well, are you just feasting on poor units? That's the way that I would look at it. But that's not what I walked away saying with FAMU. But let's walk away with what I'm saying about Alabama State. So FAMU has been a really good offense. FAMU has been a really good offense, but they did not perform up to the standard that they have set in 2024 against Alabama State. So let's look specifically at Daniel Richardson, the quarterback, because to me, the quarterback sets the tone. And when you're looking at what he's done, I think he's the front runner for SWAC player of the year so far. He's on the best team so far, and he's had really good stats. And unlike Jacobian Morgan, he hasn't had to share time with anybody. So that's the way that I look at it. Against Norfolk State, Daniel Richardson had 286 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he was 22 of 30. Against South Carolina State, he had 282 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he was 23 of 38. So, okay, cool. Gotcha. Now let's look at what he did against Troy. He went 25 of 39 for 288 yards. So the only game he's really struggled this year is against Miami, the University of Miami, the U, right? And they were the number 12 team in the nation at the time. He only completed 13 passes out of 17. So he still had a really good completion percentage, and he had 131 yards. The workload is drastically different. He had 17 attempts against Miami. His lowest amount of attempts any other game is 30. So you can basically say he nearly cut his workload in half. But even if you completely doubled it, which would actually jump what his minimum was, but it probably comes close to his average. If you just doubled his numbers, you're still looking at only 266 yards. But regardless, you get to Alabama State, an FCS opponent, where he's had 280 some yards against all the other teams except for the University of Miami, even another FBS opponent in Troy. He had a good number. He had 196 yards on 20 of 30 completions. 20 of 30. 20 completions out of 30 attempts, right? He did still hit his 3 touchdowns. But overall, this was not a great showing by him. They made plays when they had to, which was kind of the story of the day for FAMU, is that they'll make the plays when they need to. When they have to, you can look at them to count on them to make these plays, right? But outside of Ace Cobb, who I highlighted as our player of the week, and even his wasn't great, you didn't have a lot of production offensively. The way they went about the offensive game was different. There wasn't these deep shots that were super effective. There wasn't a lot of targeting outside. Caleb Offord and James Burgess probably were getting bored out there, but they were making plays of their own. You're looking at Burgess, who had an interception. Really good play. Really good play. It was a pass breakup by one of the safeties, and it got batted down, and Burgess was right there for it. But he hustled, right? So that was a strong play, a really good hustle play by him. But then he also had a forced fumble. You're looking at Offord, who, to me, he had one standout breakup. He had 2 pass breakups on the day, but he had one that was just absolutely amazing. I actually recorded it. I recorded it because he did a certain celebration after. But you just watch it, how beautiful it was, how he played it, the late hand to get in there and break it up. No contact. That cornerback tandem is elite. And I think Daniel Richardson avoided them for majority of the game. You just, and that's smart. You just, why test them? You know, like the majority of his game was short and it was inside. Like Ace Cobb had his bomb touchdown. Cool. But you look at Jamari Gassett, 7 catches, 28 yards. I think that's way more reflective of how the majority of FAMU's game went. Excuse me. That's the majority of it. The majority of it was, we're going to throw and we're going to be dinking and dunking. We're going to be short because we understand we can't get over the top right now. And I hate saying things like that because I think people take that as an insult, and you hear things like dinking and dumping. And it's not, though. It's really not an insult. It's just an analysis of how the game played out. And it was mostly short throws. Also, I want to get this other thing about Offord and Burgess. Offord and Burgess, they're so physical. There was a couple of plays in which they were alone. It was them and the wide receiver on one side of the field, and I think they were in zone coverage. So the wide receiver motion away. So now there's no receivers on the side of Burgess or Offord. It was 2 plays, one for one guy, one for the other. And it ended up being a run. And the way they came down, they were physical. They don't mind tackling. They do not mind tackling. It's almost as if they enjoy it. And you saw that with Burgess in game 1, where he was easily the best tackler on the team. The cornerback was the best tackler on the team against Alabama State, where it felt like whenever runners were getting by people, they would get to Burgess and they wouldn't get by anymore. So this team, this talent, I really enjoy the defense. I hate that the quarterback position is what it is. I guess they want to attack while the iron is hot. The only problem is, if FAMU beats Jackson State on the 19th, you might as well wrap it up. Let Zach Sims take all of his bumps. If you want to try to say, well, we need to win everything now because our defense is so great. If FAMU beats Jackson State, it ain't gonna matter. FAMU is winning the SWAC East. You're not gonna get a game up on them, and they have to be perfect now. with the quarterback situation, they have to be perfect. I'm not gonna say run. I'm not gonna say offense anymore because I like their running backs. I like Kinsey and I like Holtzclaw. But the quarterback, miss me with it. Miss me with it. But now I want to talk about the Southern Jaguars because they had a player on this team who said that they needed to be humbled, and that's what they got after the Nicholls loss. It's an interesting way to say that. Let's break down. Let's read it and break it down as we continue with Locked On HBCU. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, the WNBA playoffs still going. The NFL is going. Matter of fact, as I'm recording this, I have to get out. So we can get to this Saints game in a couple of minutes, right? But make money on that. The NBA is starting to play their preseason games or whatever they call it. The MLB is in the playoffs now. Go make some stinking money on FanDuel. FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network, and they're here for you. Put down your first $5 bet, and you get $200 back in bonus bets. It's really a simple deal. It's not complex at all. You go to FanDuel.com. Use the or you don't have to use the code. You just put down a $5 bet and you get $200 back in bonus bets. So go to FanDuel.com to make every moment more. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. We've looked at Alabama State's defense. We looked at North Carolina Central as a team. Okay, cool. Now let's take a look at Southern because Southern lost too. But they have some interesting comments. It was one player in particular. It was an Air Force transfer. You know, those Air Force guys, they got a certain level of leadership, right? You know, but it was Herman Brister, safety, transferred in from Air Force. Like I said, the Jaguars lost 51-7 against Nicholls. And this is what Brister said. He said we needed this humbleness coming off the PV win. Coming back from Prairie View, we kind of got ahead of ourselves. We needed this loss to humble us. I respect his honesty. I really do. But if you got cocky off of that PV that PV win, I'm questioning the mentality of the team. I respect the honesty, and maybe this would be the turning point. He may be correct, right? I'm not in that locker room. To say that Brister is incorrect and not appropriately evaluating his teammates, I'm not in that position. I'm not in a position to say that. But I'll say this. If they got cocky after beating PV, I really have to question, because what reason did they have to be cocky before that? One win should not make you cocky. One win should not require you to be humbled. Right? Like this is one win. You struggled at the beginning of that Savannah State game. Jackson State was beating you bad. Then you come in and you beat PV, and that's enough for you to start smelling yourself. I have to question what's going on in the locker room. Why are you feeling this way? I understand that PV was a team that PV is an interesting team where they lost to TSU. Then I got high on TSU. I've kind of fallen down a little bit on the Tigers because I haven't liked some of the things I've seen since the PV game. And I don't know. It's just a little difficult. It's a little difficult for me to evaluate PV. But even if PV is everything we thought that they would be, that's not, one game is not enough to be cocky. One game is not enough to sit here and be full of yourself, because that's what it means to be humbled. To be humbled means to be brought down to earth in this situation. To be humbled means that you had to be at a place up here and you got brought down. At what point did at what point did Southern deserve to leave earth? At what point did they deserve to get the big head? That's my thing. That's why I challenge what is up with the mentality. You beat PV. Matter of fact, you had to come back to beat PV. It's not like you beat PV 51-7. You beat them in OT. I question this. I question the mentality of Southern to allow one game. If I'm impressed by the PV game, I wasn't overly impressed by the Savannah State game. And I for sure wasn't impressed with how they looked against Jackson State. You have not been consistent enough for your head to get big. That's how I view it. That's how I feel about it. That's how I view it, and that's how I feel about it. So, and you look at what Coach Graves said. Coach Graves, they on a completely different side of the spectrum right now. Because Coach Graves had some interesting comments. Coach Graves said, let's pull this clip. I mean, not this clip, but let's pull this quote up. He said, look, that's the thing that's frustrating is you coach guys, you put them in positions and you look up and guys are not in positions. We have to fix that. We have to figure out why guys are not where they're supposed to be and doing what they're supposed to do at all times. We definitely got to sit down, cut this thing open, look at and fix this in a hurry. You should not go from being big-headed. So we have to cut this thing down and fix it in a hurry. Clearly, Graves wasn't big-headed, but you look at the temperament. You do not go from that to this in one game. So I question what's going on with the mentality in that locker room for you to go from. I understand why Graves is like, we got to cut it open and look at it. I understand that. That shouldn't come 60 minutes after having a big head. That's all I'll say. In the meantime, in between tomorrow, I cannot wait to talk about a team that hopefully does not have the big head, but they have earned it. And you're talking about South Carolina State. Watch out, because they look like a player in the MEAC. In the meantime, in between time, till the next time that we talk to each other, family, take care. Stay blessed. Peace.